Hey humans, this is a quick note that this episode was recorded towards the end of 2020, so there are some inaccurate predictions about the COVID pandemic. Thanks.
So I think I want to talk a little bit about how we revise,
Yeah,
if we can
sure.
take it in that direction. And I think, and this actually goes to drafting as well, because so for me, a surprising amount of the process has to do with energy and attention, I think. So, and I think this has become clearer to me after my ADD diagnosis. And I take a medication, Vyvanse, which is essentially speed. And it brings me, back up to normal levels, I think. Normal,
Huh.
neurotypical levels is maybe a better framing. What it lets me do is when I sit down to work on something, I can think about it coherently for a 45-minute stretch without getting distracted 20 times in the process and my mind wandering off. Okay, so a lot of what revision is for me, or both drafting and revision, I think my challenge is often about keeping enough focus on the project that I can think it through well, that I can, let both my conscious and my subconscious be working productively on that and not scattered. And so, in terms of mechanisms for helping me with that, a few things really immediately jump to mind. One is I have to get up early. I write much better in the morning than at any other time. And when I was writing Bodies in Motion, I would actually set an alarm and get up at 4 in the morning in the dark. And I would make, for a year, right? This is in grad school. I had no life. Kevin and I had broken up. I would cry myself to sleep and then get up in the morning to write. And I would ritualize it so that I didn't have to think through the steps. So I would get up, I'd make my tea, which in retrospect, tea has caffeine, and that actually probably had a little bit of a focusing effect as well. But I didn't know that at the time. And I would make my first cup of tea. I would drink like 3 or 4 cups over the course of the morning. I eventually learned how to drink coffee, which is more effective. And is a kind of standard ADD hack for people who are not taking medication. But then I would light a candle, I'd put on my background music, something without words, and I'd open the file, right? This was a sequence. And it was dark and quiet. The world was around me was asleep. And I would start on the book. I would often, at that point, I was doing a lot of like stopping writing in the middle of a sentence so that I had a very easy pickup point going forward. And all of that was tremendously helpful, I guess is what I'm saying and now, one of the things that we've done recently is built a writing shed in the backyard, and I go out to the shed. When we finish the podcast, I'll be going out to the shed because if I'm in the house, there's laundry to be done and dishes and there's a gazillion distractions. And I've needed to create a space for myself where I can go with focus and energy. So I guess those are like the biggest, I want to say like those are the biggest obstacles to me writing well or revising well.
Would you distinguish there between writing and revising?
Not really,
Okay.
I think. So when I talk about revising, there's cleanup editing, which is a different thing. Cleanup editing, I can do at any time. I can do that with the kids screaming and whatever else. Like I'm just going through and fixing, words and commas and whatever. But like real revising I would say is redrafting. And I have to be back in that creative generative space, mental space where I'm doing deep thinking about the project. So I like that. Like I'd make a distinction between maybe it's different kinds of revising, but
I almost think there's a number of kinds of revising. I mean, now you said it's kind of interesting because I think there's a number of kinds of revising. I mean, like most of what you said, I definitely feel like that is a big struggle, particularly with first drafting or with the kind of revising where you're basically redrafting. Another thing I would add to that, yeah.
I do just want to insert the disclaimer again that this does not mean that everybody has to get up at 4 a.m. It's just that you have to find space that works for you.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really important for all of this stuff. Is it's like, I think the thing to listen for is not, oh, I'll try 4 a.m. and a candle, but to think, oh, I could vary time, I could vary space, I could vary lighting, I could vary sound, I could vary, you know what I mean? Like you actually want to, like there are night writers, there are people spontaneous, there are like writing on the subway, like you know what I mean? Like people vary dramatically.
And I'll say, like, I've actually have been productive in cafes. There are other things that that can work for me, but that was like, I don't know, like that was probably the most effective for like doing a big project and deep work.
Honestly,
right?
Writing in cafes has been the most reliably effective me for over years, which is why the pandemic initially completely broke my writing practice. But and I had to figure out other ways to do it. When it was sunny, I moved to the garden. I managed to figure out how to write in the garden, and now I'm writing in the attic. Anyway, but
I've heard people who like just a quick aside that there are people who really like the web apps that will produce cafe sounds.
That's funny.
It doesn't help me.
I've used that.
Sure,
it's great. It's because it's white noise, and I actually like. It's another ADD thing, right? Like it fills up a piece of my brain in the same way background music does, and lets me focus better.
For me, it's almost more, I mean, I have a suspicion about myself, at least, that it's more than just background white noise. It's actually social white noise. It actually tells my hindbrain there are other people around, so it's safe here because like people are relaxed and doing things. You know what I mean?
And that makes me completely incapable of working.
It doesn't sound right. Well, it doesn't sound to me like there's a, well, see, but that's interesting because I think that makes sense to me in a way, given how I know you, and because
like people are looking at you. Oh no!
It's a lot of it is words. There are words going on. I can't possibly do word stuff if there are words coming in from outside.
Which is true. That's a thing. It helps that I live in a country where the most commonly spoken language is not my mother language. So while I'm fluent in it, it always takes a little bit of effort. So it's very easy to not understand what's being said if I don't want to when people are speaking Switzerland. But
it reminds me of like I have friends who are deaf and can hear somewhat with hearing aids on, and like
take them out.
We'll take them out, turn them down to adjust how much attention they want to pay to the rest of the world.
Yeah, which is that's cool. But I was going to say, beyond all the sort of practical tips, the other big thing I would say, just while we're on the topic of like motivation, drafting, focus, whatever, the other thing in my that I constantly fiddle with, along with time of day, whether I'm with people or without people, or cafes, attic, whatever, all those parameters. The other thing that I think is something that I constantly fiddle with is a sort of the kind of quantitative measuring and feedback that I'm giving myself, like the way that I set my own expectations, how I judge whether I was productive or not, how I track. That has been hugely useful to have like a words per day, hours per day spent graph. Not for the reason you might think, because I'm like, oh, I have to achieve this goal and I'm beating myself up, but quite for the opposite, because I'm not because it gives me a broader time perspective. If I don't track anything, I'm likely to think that yesterday was the only day that ever happened. So if things went badly, like it's terrible, this project's going nowhere, I'm never going to finish. If things went well, I'm like, I'm on top of the world, there's no problem. You know what I mean? And it's like overreacting to short term. Whereas if I could just see a graph of like the last year, I'm like, okay, well, we were in this range. Oh yeah, I should probably, you know what I mean? Like, and I can notice, that's the primary thing. And secondarily, that I can notice patterns and be like, wow, every time I go to America, like the 2 weeks after I get back are a mess. Like I have to think about, not that that's a problem now that there's a pandemic, but all those things that I notice. Oh, Tuesdays, I'm just always sucking on. I'm never going to get writing on Tuesdays. Anyway, but the other thing I wanted to say is the kinds of revision, because I think there's the simple line level revision. There's the redrafting you're talking about, which is essentially like first draft space. And then there's like another kind of revision, which for me happens more with longer works, probably proportionately to the length of the work, which is like confronting big structural problems. Where the answer is not necessarily just write all the words again, and it's also not just tweak, but it's just like, shit, what do I do now? Like I've painted myself into a corner, this is not going to work. I need to strategically change. And that's a whole other kind of revision. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Judd.
Go ahead. I was going to ask how you approach that, but go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Yeah, well, so I was going to say, So it's interesting. So in grad school, right, I took a class on creative nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, and I guess I was going to talk about my Facebook practice because I have gotten in the habit over many, many years of blogging, and my blog is the third oldest on the internet, according to the Online Diary History Project. And that it's mostly moved to Facebook. I've gotten into the habit of essentially writing the kinds of essays I was taught to write in grad school as Facebook posts. So they are often what's called a braided essay, where I'm taking various threads, putting them up against each other, intertwining aspects of memoir with analysis. They're subject based, etc. And honestly, like if I would just go to the effort of like submitting them to magazines and so on, they'd be publishable, right? Like instead of just posting it on Facebook, I could probably publish them in places. And I guess what I wanted to say is like that kind of piece, I've now done so much that the structural work is entirely intuitive. I don't have to think about it consciously anymore. They mostly don't need revision because I've done all of that structural stuff in the back of my head, and it just comes out right. When I go to novels, I don't have that, right? I don't have that kind of facility. Short stories are somewhere in between. Like I can sometimes hold the whole story in my head and the structure is right. Sometimes I draft it and there's something interesting, but the structure is a mess. And I can usually, it may take several rounds to figure out what the right structure is. Usually I get there eventually. With novels, it's like wading into a dark sea. I feel like, there's so many possibilities for structure. There's so many options. And, I mean, this novel that I just gave my agent now has gone from like 80,000 words to 40,000 words to 60,000 words back up to 80,000 words. It is a completely different book now than the first version. And it's taken me something like 4 years to get it to, I think it now has the right shape, a shape that works. I mean, the right shape is maybe not the correct thing. Like there's probably multiple possible right shapes, but it's come to a shape that finally works. And it's probably still not finalized. Like I'm hoping an editor will look at it and help me refine it, but it's at least the core is there. So
I want to hear from both of you then what how you figure out that needs to that sort of structural change needs to happen, and B, how you go about making it.
Yeah, I think that I think it's interesting because I mean, I feel much the same, like except I don't have the braided essay thing. But the short stories I have in the past been more like I've had a lot more track record. I've written a lot more short stories, and I, at least for a while, was at a point where I was kind of like, oh, this is a short story. It feels like this.
I think you kind of have it with game design because you know games so well that there's a piece of it that you don't have to think about. It's intuitive to you. So that's
or at least that there's not a break. Because also when I'm doing game design, there are big structural changes, but but I think I feel less floundering than with novels. Like I think with game design, I have a more of an intuitive feel of like, okay, here we need a big structural change. Like this subsystem isn't working. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so do both of you think that you'll get better at this as you write more novels? Because neither of you have written a lot of novels.
I sure hope so. God.
I don't know. From talking to novelists, what they say, the problem is, so it depends on what kind of novelist you are, right? If you are the kind of novelist that is not writing a series of similar commercial work, right, that have a predictable structure. If you're the kind of novelist where each book is its own thing, then I'm afraid what I've heard is that you have to flounder in the dark every time.
I think that's probably, good question. I think that's true. You have to, you never learn how to write a novel. You just learn how to write. You always have to learn how to write this novel. It's interesting that you say commercial work because it's the same thing you're describing with the braided essay. I think there are people who are perfectly fine replicating the same structure, and it could be ambitious in other ways, but like they're, you know what I mean? But they have that structure in their bones.
I agree. Like I don't make every time I say commercial, you kind of react if I'm saying something negative, and I don't mean it to be negative. I just mean like there is a predictive pattern structure that readers like, and that is like it's functional, right?
You may be right that I'm raising my hackles to the word commercial, but B, I'm just not sure. I think there's a correlate. I think there's an overlap, but I don't actually think there's probably. I don't know. Anyway, so we don't have those writers here. The ones who were like, oh, novel structure, walk in the park. Badoom, badoom, badoom. I do think there are some people who write some pretty outre avant-garde weirdo novels, but always use the same outre avant-garde weirdo structure for those outre avant-garde weirdo novels. I mean,
I've written 2 choose your own adventure novels, right? And those were, I suppose an unusual structure and very predictable, right? It was a very, I built in a couple little surprises there, which were fun for me, but mostly it's a very straightforward structure.
I don't know. This is probably a dead end because I don't have. I will. Perhaps I will think later of some examles, but I don't think it's a minor point.
We should bring on as a guest someone who writes serial fiction that is, anyway.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is, so we've both had this experience of like writing a couple novels over a while, and over many, many years, and a lot of groping in the dark. I think that for me, but it's also true to some extent of larger short works, like something that's like 1,500 words. I pretty much don't ever encounter. There's not that much structure. Like either it all comes or not, and it's kind of like it's like voomf. It's almost like feels like those Zen paintings where you paint with one brush stroke. You know what I mean? Like zoomf.
Yeah.
Like it sort of feels like zoomf, and like a lot of times they're crap. Like a lot of times I write and it's like never mind. But that's like it only took a day, so it's like fine, whatever. Not doing that. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're like, oh, this is something, and then there's some refining, but there's never a big structural problem. As I began to write longer things, I began to get to the point where I had to stop and sort of figure out what was going to happen. And I remember writing my story. Biographical notes to a discourse on the nature of causality with airplanes by Benjamin Rosenbaum. It's the title of the story. That I was just like, this is a goofy romp. It's a picaresque. I'm going to do all these things, whatever. I have all these balls in the air. And I reached to the point of the story in the middle where I was like, I have no idea how this is supposed to end. Like, I don't know what we're doing here. Like, why? This is an example of revision because it was actually first drafting, but I was just like, what was I thinking? Like, how is this all gonna? I've just madcap romp piled one improbable thing on the other. And there, what I did, which I amused myself greatly by doing, was I was just like, well, I will give this problem to my protagonist. So I have the protagonist be like, how can it be that pirates and a warship and a murder mystery are all happening at the same time? What possible sense could that make? And then the protagonist figured it out, and that worked out great. So I delegated to my protagonist, who is an alternate universe version of me. So I feel like that's fair. But I when I was writing the Unraveling, I came to a point where I was just bogging down. You said, how do you know that it's not working? And in a lot of cases, I mean, again, this is forced revision. It's not like I had reached a first draft and was then revising. This was like I had to go back and change everything because it wasn't cohering.
Okay, so when you finish with this thought, I do want to hear. I feel like we keep coming back to first draft when talking about, and it'd be interesting to hear about differences. But go ahead, finish what you're saying about Unraveling first draft.
There was a lot of stuff that was like this after first draft too, but the example I'm specifically thinking of, I had not technically finished the whole thing. I mean, I think the signal is that I don't like it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? The structural signal in both cases was that I don't like it. The signal in the first draft phase was that my protagonist had buried themselves in the ground and refused to come up. We had a labor dispute. It was like, it's time to get out and do something. And the protagonist was like, no, another flashback about my life in the cosmos. And I was like, we had enough of those. Like it was very contentious between me and the protagonist, who I then fired. But it is a happy ending because now that story, like I just published in Asimov's Bereft, I Come to a Nameless World, which has Siav, the old protagonist. Thank you, the old protagonist of the Unraveling. So But anyway, one piece of thing I want to give as a tidbit of a thing I did that I'm sort of pleased by is that I was like, what the hell is going on with this book? It's a mess. And I think this would work equally well after you were done with writing the end. And I took a sheet of graph paper. I want to just say this because it's a very practical technique and I've never heard anyone else do it. And I took colored pencils, and I had different colored pencils for like who was the point of view character, what was the tone, and maybe some other axis, like third person, first person, what, yeah, I don't know, point of view, character, main character, what was the kind of plot, like maybe if there was more than one kind of plot going on. And I just like looked at each page, and each page was a square on the graph paper. And so for each page, I colored in the square of the graph paper, whether it was, I was desperate at this point, but I colored in for like which protagonist and what. And so I had this piece of paper with this visual representation of like what the book was actually doing, because it was too long at this point. It was a novel. It was like 100,000. I'd already written 100,000 words, and I could not fit it in my head. So I did not know what it looked like. You know what I mean? And so I made this visual representation of like what is going on in this book, which, to my surprise, I found out that of the 100,000 words, 40,000 were about my recalcitrant protagonist, who at this point had buried themselves into the polar waste and was not coming up. And 60,000 words were about what I thought was kind of like a comic relief secondary subplot. And I was like, screw the protagonist, I'm writing the subplot.
So it sounds like in some sense the key there was looking at what you had already done, looking at it descriptively rather than what you thought you wanted to do, and taking some cues from that. Yeah?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's... Go ahead.
No, it's interesting. Like there's a technique we do in my lit classes for when the students are writing essays. It's reverse outlining, right? Because they often don't have a strong handle on how to write an argumentative paper yet, and so they've written something fairly intuitively, and especially it's often a problem even in the upper level classes where people are good at English and books, and they do great on the sort of sentence level analysis of quotes and whatever, but there isn't an argument that hangs together, and so they ramble. Rambling is like super common, and they're just sort of, here's an idea, here's another idea, let me throw out 500 great ideas. And so what we have them do is, and sometimes they do it on their own, sometimes they do it for each other in workshop. They take the paper they've written and generate a reverse outline of like, this is what you actually did structurally, right? Is that what you want to do? Nice. Right? And right. Often it's not what you want to do. Right. And once they see that, they're like, oh, I didn't really mean to talk about, whatever. And they can reallocate the space of the paper to the things they want to do. And so I guess I don't tend to do that for fiction. I would do it for an essay. I mean, I don't usually bother writing out the outline, but in revising, that's probably what I'm doing in my head, is I'm looking to see, like, did I put the right amount of space and attention to the things that I'm trying to persuade people of or convince people of. In fiction, I think in book length work, what happened for me with this last book, and I think maybe this is illustrative, is I had some good elements. I set out to do a thing that was fundamentally almost impossible to do. And I kind of had the wrong project initially, right? Because I was like, I want to write a commercial, epic, galaxy-spanning series, and for the first book, she's going to save the planet. Okay. And then up against that, I put the fact that, like, oh, I hate fated, like, he's the one chosen kind one. Of narratives, right? Chosen one narratives. And so, and I'm sick of things about royalty and, everyone's a secret royal or whatever else. And so I just want to write about an everyday person. So, which is what a lot of my fiction is about, everyday people navigating their lives. Then I tried to write this book, and it ended up cartoonish and making no sense, because it really didn't make sense that my everyday person would end up in a position to save the planet. And to get her to do that, I had to really strain credulity in various ways, right? I had to have coincidences and, cartoonish explosions and whatever else, right?
And probably importantly,
many explosions.
And importantly here, strain your own credulity. Because because it's not, because many people have pulled this off. Right. There are lots of works where the ordinary person saves the planet or whatever, saves the thing, Hunger Games, whatever, that were. But like the point is that it's not so much that you're doing an impossible in principle task as you're doing a task that wasn't what you really, on a deep unconscious level, bought or like thought was right.
Yeah. I didn't buy it. I didn't, and I was sort of troubled all the way along. I would have these long conversations with Kevin in bed about, in the middle of the night about like, do you think it's too much of a coincidence? How do we like get this coincidence to not look like a coincidence? And just like over and over and over again, it was just painful. In fact, like coming up with these workarounds, and like in retrospect, I'm like, why did I torture myself trying to like put these two things together that were not working? And so in revision, I gave this to my agent, and he basically, and I gave it to him hoping he would say, "This is great." Shower me with praise. And yet I knew on some level that it was fundamentally broken. And then when he wrote back and said, "This is fundamentally broken," I showed this to Jed, and Jed was sort of like, "He's so mean to you." And I was like, no. Like, he said what I already knew, right? And he said it maybe a little bluntly, but I was fine with that. So I ended up in revision stripping out the saving the planet plot entirely, right? Like just taking all of that out. And I was like, maybe I can get a decent novella that's like a small family story out of it. And that helped immensely. And then that took it down to 40,000 words, where I discovered my second major problem, which is that I had gone too fast. Right. So this is a completely different problem than the first problem. The book had multiple major problems with it, right? And so
you had to remove one of them before you could see what the others were.
Yeah, right. Like. And so the completely different problem was that I had this very compressed time scale in which everything was happening in 3 days, but I was trying to tell this emotional story that required falling in love in a way that convinced me, et cetera, so on, right? Like I needed people to grow to care about each other even though they were strangers. It was an arranged marriage story, and I hadn't allowed enough space in two different ways. I hadn't allowed enough space in the timeline of the story. I also told the story in such a compressed manner that the reader didn't get to spend time with the people in like their everyday activities and get to fall in love with them as well, right? So there were like two different time problems there. So it took years for me to figure this out. I don't know. Like that was, so that, I don't know. Does that answer your question, Jed? I was like trying to like, it's a very specific set of problems to this book, right? And I've written novels before that had other problems.
Yeah, it always is. Well, I think the overarching how do you know is that like you are your own reader. So like, you know what I mean? It's like if you're bothering to write a book, you probably care about how it is to read a book. So like you read the book and you're like, you know what I mean? Like there's all or other people tell you.
I didn't want to press it on people, right? Like, which is a bad sign, right? When you finish writing your book, you should be excited about it. You should think it's great. You should like want people to read it. And I was like, I'd give it to people to read with apologies, like, you know, like this is, and you know, sorry to make you read this. You know, so that's, well, no, but it's good. Like it's much better now. It's maybe not perfect yet. I'm gonna do another revision. Jed's read all the versions of this, but like the later version is much better. And like I now can hand it to people knowing they're gonna find at least some of it delightful, and you know what I mean. Like I find some of it delightful, right? So
I think following delight and like where is this fun and where is this like bogging down, or I felt like I had to do it, or that is like a really key piece, and like all, you know, you were going to say something else.
Well, I think that highlights an interesting experience for me as a critiquer and editor, that in the earlier version of that book, I thought it was fine. And I am more tolerant of coincidences than you are. And so I just said, okay, coincidence, that's fine. It's a genre convention. This is all fine. And I didn't push because I was coming at it from a, there are lots of ways to do things, and this way is a perfectly good way to do things approach. And so in the end, you got more useful feedback from the person who was not willing to say there's a bunch of ways of doing things, and you ended up writing what I think is a much better book. But I would not have gotten you there with my feedback. I was much more going to say, what you're doing, I will help you do the project that you're doing, rather than saying this is the wrong project.
Which is an interesting point. I feel like, but I think Marianne knew it was the wrong project, is the point.
Yes.
Like definitely. That unease that she had. And this brings me, I wanted to mention about another kind of revision, and I think also let's go ahead and pack it in with the notion of feedback.
Yeah.
So 3 things. One is, I just want to say, in my process, like we were talking about process, caveat again, not your process, my process.
Yeah.
A listener, but like, I have to do the first draft kind of alone with the door closed, not showing anyone, because I will get too either excited about, distracted by their praise, or confused by their input, or whatever. I have to then put it away for a while, then come back to it and make it as good as I can on my own. Like going through and finding what I find boring or confusing or whatever, and fixing that. Then I have to give it out to possibly multiple rounds of feedback, but certainly a round of feedback. And this speaks to the thing I was going to say about earlier, what you had said, when you go around and you get 3 people agree. I mean, I think it's not a bad rule of thumb, not a bad first cut. Okay, a lot of people are saying this, but I actually think that there is a danger there of making it sound like it's a vote. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not a democracy. There could be 13 people say this, and I'm like, fuck you, that's not the story I'm writing, right?
Yeah.
Or there could be one person who says it, and everybody disagrees violently with them, and I'm like, no, busted. You know what I mean? What you're listening for is the echo inside your own heart.
Definitely.
Yes.
You are putting it out there because you can't see what you don't see yet, but when somebody articulates it and you go, oh God, that's the thing you need to listen for. That's one kind of thing you need to listen for. But the other thing I want to say, and I've probably said this before, and I will probably say it again if we have an episode on feedback, but the thing I will just say very briefly is that, because I feel like this was really important for me, is one big danger of Clarion. I love Clarion. Going to Clarion is great. I wish I'd been told in some ways, maybe I don't know if I wish this or not, but one thing that's useful to know is most of those, I wrote 6 stories, 1 a week. They mostly did not survive.
Yeah.
The one that I wrote the first night before Clarion had started, I wrote it the first night, actually made it to be a real story, and I think was nominated for Nebula or something. But that's the only one that survived. The other ones were all dead. One of them was the great germ of what later maybe sort of became Start the Clock in certain ways, that it had feelings of found family or whatever. But none of the words survived. And that is par for the course for me, precisely because I was writing this in the open, getting lots of feedback way too early, and it was breaking the story. And partly because I didn't know how to deal with the feedback yet, because people would tell me 17 different things, and I'm very, as I said, I'm a sort of accommodator, and I would be like, oh, that's a really good point. Oh, that's a really good point. It's really easy for me it's great as a writer to be able to very easily step into the shoes of somebody else, but I too easily could be like, oh my God, you're totally right. And then I would try to make it what everybody wanted, which definitely will break your story. If you listen to all the problems that everyone articulate and treat that as a to-do list of problems that you should fix in your story, you will kill your story, because it won't have any harmony left. It will just be a selection of independent fixes from independent sources that you're never going to recover from that. So certainly, as you said, you have to learn to ignore a lot of it, but you are listening for a couple of things. One is, what I really want from people, most readers, is their line-by-line specific experience, here I got bored. It's then fine if they also tell me their theory about why and what I could fix, but that is like a kind of a secondary thing. Sometimes if somebody's really on my wavelength, really understands the story, they can come up with brilliant solutions that I'm like, oh my God, that's great, I'm just taking that. That's far better than what I was planning, or like your interpretation is better, or whatever. But a lot of times their fix is not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And sometimes if they don't give me their ground level experience, if they don't give me like, I like this guy until this page, and then I thought he was an asshole because he did this, and now I'm no longer sympathetic, and then when he does this, I'm not buying it. Like if they don't give me that track, I have to reconstruct it. If they say it's too dark and what you need is for him to save her because blah, 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 I'm like, no, but I bet that what was happening is I guess on page 36 you decided that guy was an asshole. Like I have to work backwards from their solution to their actual experience, because I can't use their solution, I have to make my solution. But having their experience is very useful. And once I can get a bunch of people's experience, what's interesting is, and I have a very strong memory of learning this in the revision process for the guy who worked for money, which is kind of interesting because it's online. Because as part of when I wrote that for shareable.net, I posted, like there was they also had me do a bunch of blog posts about writing the story. And like, so I actually have a post of like the original draft and then all the revisions and like all the people's feedback and like with their permission. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting that the most important feedbacks, I think, were Hadar and David Moles, where Hadar was super in sympathy with the story. David Moles thought the protagonist was thought the story suffered from the protagonist being flimsy, kind of a caricature, and for sort of that it was sexism, right? That this woman was sort of running around at the behest of all these men. Hadar was fiercely defensive of the female character, who she very much identified with and thought that her flaws were very or not identified with, but she thought her flaws were like really real and telling, and that she would be subordinating herself in this way, and that was the point of the story. And like, what was interesting was to be like, okay, Hadar's reading is the one I want. David Moles' reading is the map of all the things that are in the way of the reader having that reading. You know what I mean? Like
or at least of that reader.
But in a way they were illuminating. You know, I mean, yes, of course it was just that reader, but the person who liked it least and the person who liked it most were. It's not always the case, but for me, this is sort of a paradigm that I've later applied of being like, the person who liked it most is telling you something. Because if you just have a laundry list of problems, you're just revising away from problems. No one's articulated what you're revising toward. It's very easy to get lost. If you can be like, Hadar loved it. This is what she loved. I need to keep that as the like shining light that I'm heading for. Like that's what I want people to get. That's more than just like let me satisfy, because the people who didn't like the story, they don't know what to like about it. So they're saying sometimes, obviously, this is a caricature oversimplified. I'm separating things into two camps. But like to the extent that they didn't like the story, they aren't present to the thing that is to like about it. So the one person is telling you what to like about it, the other person is telling you what's in the way. And if your goal is not like I need to fix their problem so they're happy, but like, oh, I need to open the way for them to see the things, which is not, again, it's an oversimplification because they can see other things. But like, there are these blocks for them getting that experience. It's like when Harry met Sally, I'll have what she's having scene. It's like, I want to give them what she got.
Yeah.
Hey there, humans. So, we talk a lot about writing on this podcast, and one thing that's been made abundantly clear is that writing in community is important, maybe even essential. And the SLF provides exactly that with our co-writing sessions. They happen every Saturday from 11 to 2 Central. You can find out more on the SLF website. You can also join our Facebook group called SLF Co-Writing. I've been hosting these sessions with my co-host Victor Raymond for many months now, and it's been super helpful. So if you need to write in community, need a place like that, please feel free to join. The links will be in the description. Thanks.
I want to go back. Marianne, were you about to say something?
I mean, I'm thinking about how you and I workshop together with the Strange Horizons workshops, and I think your approach to workshopping maybe changed a little.
When you say you,
and I'm thinking Jed,
okay.
Jed, you, and I guess I'm also thinking Ben didn't run the Strange Horizons workshops with me.
The listeners may not know that.
Okay, so maybe we can talk about that a little. But I was also thinking about grad school, and I've been trying to pinpoint like where did I formulate my ideas about like how to workshop well? And I had been in workshops before. I was in my first workshop was a truly terrible workshop at the University of Chicago after college, where I took a workshop as a grad student at large with some famous writer who was awful. He never had anything good to say about the writing of any of the women in class. And it was super obvious by the end of the semester, but you had to like suffer through thinking your stuff was terrible until the pattern became clear. And it was just miserable. So it's kind of amazing that it didn't turn me off workshopping entirely, but I did. And then I did some community writing workshops. And then in my master's program at Mills College, I had Julie Shikakuni was my advisor. And I kind of have to shout out to her here because, for one thing, I tried to give her a fantasy novel to read, and she was like, I don't know how to critique this. I don't read this kind of thing. And when I said to her, just address, the parts that are common, such as characterization, etc., so on, she was like, okay, I'll try. And I have to say that was a very unusual attitude. Her openness to attempting that, I really appreciated. So many lit people back in the day would have just been like, no, I can't deal with dragons. Please give me something realistic, right? So,
replace the dragons with cancer.
So shout out there. Also, what's relevant here is that we were going into, I had a meeting with her before class about my story or something. And then as we were walking to class, I said to her, the story that we're critiquing today, I thought it was terrible. I don't know how to critique it. I don't know how to say anything nice about it, or, I'm just going to be, I don't know how to approach this. And she, I think, was the one who kind of put into words that to try and figure out what the writer was trying to do and then help them do that. I really think I got that from her.
And I got it from you.
Right. That's the thing. And so that formulation was very useful to me to look at, okay, what is it they're attempting here? Maybe they're nowhere in terms of actually accomplishing it, but look for the elements that are supporting what they're trying to do and emphasize those and praise those, right? And don't give them a laundry list of everything that's wrong with it. And I guess I kind of want to connect this also to a sort of common error in how writing is taught generally for like lit papers, et cetera, so on. We all had like the English teachers with the red pen who went through and marked everything up, right? And some of them were brilliant, excellent people. And I had BJ Smith was my English teacher in high school, and she would draw like a little teardrop of blood. She said she was weeping tears of blood with her red pen at each punctuation or grammar error. And at the third one, she would stop and grade the paper on what you'd written so far. So if there were 3 errors in the first paragraph, that's what you got graded on. And it was brutal. It was very old school brutal. It did mean that after that first paper, we all proofread extremely carefully before handing anything in. So it's sort of useful from a discipline point of view. But I've read enough composition pedagogy to know that sort of studies have shown that if students encounter a page that's covered in red ink, they stop engaging with the work, right? They shut down. The criticism hits them generally, on average, very hard, and you don't get what you want. What you want is them to improve, and instead they will go through and mechanically correct everything you told them to correct and hand that in as a revision, and it's not a revision, and they haven't engaged again. So what I would recommend if you're, say, teaching literature, composition, whatever, you're grading papers, is you look at the work and you say, okay, what is it they're trying to do? Tell them what they're doing well, and then pick 1 or 2 things that you want them to work on for the next draft. And don't use red. Like literally the red pen is, people have kind of shut down in response to that. So I use a purple pen if I'm going to be handwriting things. But really, like, one or two things. In your next draft, I'd like to see you work on, the structure of your argument, or developing a more complex thesis, or, whatever it might be. So, sorry, this is kind of going off into a side
part of what
but
you're talking about is really that it sounds, what I'm getting out of what you're saying probably is that they're really just teaching. High school English teachers have the unfortunate job and possible impossible job of trying to teach two different things. Like, it's perfectly fine to have a proofreading class where your job is to make sure all the semicolons are in the right place. It is very difficult to pay attention to both that and have sort of a free, expansive exchange of ideas where you're coming with creative new ideas, and also worry about all that. You know what I mean? Like, those are kind of two different modes. They honestly could just be two different periods, really. You know what I mean? Because
and I usually tell my students, like, you have many errors in this that I am not marking. Like, I'll just say, like, you're not at the stage where I'm going to worry about marking errors, because I want to work on this more fundamental issue, developmental editing issue, right?
Yeah.
So,
and if you do, and I used to do this in workshops before I met you, Marianne, if you do mark every typo in a story, and then at the end of the workshop the writer says, "This is great, I'm going to completely rewrite this from scratch," then all of that work on marking the typos was wasted. There was no point in doing it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a reason why you have these stages to editing, right?
Yes.
Like, like traditionally you do the developmental editing first.
Yes.
When you get it to a certain point, then maybe a copy edit, then maybe a proofread,
well,
right?
This is why it's important to ask people. This is also in general an important thing we're talking now a lot about critiquing the peer-to-peer activity, not the professional editing pipeline. And like, one of the things you ask is, what do you want? Because it's a really important question. What kind of feedback do you want? Because if somebody is like, I am just polishing, then it is perfectly reasonable to give them all the proofreading.
Sure.
But if somebody, I was like, I'm going to post this tomorrow, but if somebody is like, I don't know, this is a mess, then obviously that's wasted effort. And sometimes, honestly, on a first read, when I've just finished a first draft, I may be like, I am literally just looking for cheerleading and moral support.
Yep.
Like, that is
Definitely.
a completely legitimate use of your community and your friend base, is to be just like, please tell me that you know what I mean? Not even like, and honestly, it doesn't even have to be evaluative. It's just like, it's not even, I mean, I think that there's something, I'm not saying like there's something sort of insincere about like, tell me this is good if you don't think it's good, but even the question is the wrong question, because it's like, I'm just giving you something to enjoy, like, just enjoy it or not. And like, if you're excited, share your enthusiasm with me. That is like a very great early stage kind of critique.
Well, even for late stage, right? For this last book, by the time I figured everything out, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I asked for cheerleaders at that point. Like, I posted on Facebook, because like, I want all I need right now, and I think this is something that's maybe a little lacking in writing as opposed to sports, for example. Like, in sports, everyone knows that cheering for your team is incredibly important,
really powerful.
right? I mean,
like, there's a home team advantage.
Right. There's like a real effect here, and so the last round of like novel revisions was exhausting for me. It was really tiring, even though at that point, like, I knew what to do and I was even enjoying doing it. But it was, I'd been working on the book for 4 years and I was drained. And I just needed like 10 people to like read the chapters as I sent them out and tell me that they liked things, right? What do you like? Like, just keep me going. And it was super, super useful. I do want to go back to also the other problem with the kind of copy editing that Jed was talking about, is that, especially in a school situation, there's a power dynamic teacher authority thing that kicks in, so that when students get the teacher's comments on their story or paper or whatever, they put too much weight on them, because they have to, because of grading and whatever else. But also, they often tend to assume that if they correct the things that the teacher has marked, they're done, and that those corrections then actively get in the way of redrafting.
Yeah,
so,
and that does happen with editing too.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a problem kind of like across literature, like literary instruction and composition instruction, that too much emphasis is placed on getting the punctuation, the grammar, et cetera, correct. And I understand it's like, it's sometimes reading my students' papers, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, right? Like, trying to wade through all of the errors can be very difficult, right? So I will say to them, like, there were so many errors in this piece, it made it really hard for me to look at your arguments well, right? And so please, like, run it through spell check, have a friend look at it, like, do that cleanup pass so that we can talk about the important stuff, right? So,
so that roundaboutly, sorry, were you done with that thought? Okay. That roundaboutly brings me back to something that I wanted to say in response to something Ben said earlier about getting something to be as good as you can make it before you show it to someone. And I kind of agree with that in principle, but in practice, I find that if I put in all the work that is necessary to get it to be as good as I can make it, and then I show it to people, then I'm really attached to it. And and when they tell me stuff, even if it's really good and perfectly valid feedback, I feel like, wow, that's a lot more work. And I already made it as good as I could. And now you're telling me that I have to do all this work. And at that point, I generally put the story in a drawer and never look at it again. I'm wondering
that's a really good point. I mean, that's a really good point. And again, that depends a lot on your psychological makeup. Like, if you know that about yourself, that's what's going to happen, then don't do that. You know, I feel like that is not my set of expectations. Like, I feel like when I am done, when I finish the first polish of, like, this is as good as much as I can see now. I don't know if I learned this from experience or if I always had this orientation, but certainly at this point, I'm like, so now come the critiques. Like, I'm waiting. I mean, like, I'm assuming there's a lot more to do. I'm almost disappointed if there's not. Honestly, like, honestly, if I sit down and people are like, it's good, I'm like, no, but come on. Because so maybe honestly, and maybe this is something that grew over the course of doing this a lot. As I was saying, like of course I love the praise. That's the superficial thing. And I mean, when I say superficial, I really, really, really love it. It's not that I don't. I mean, I'm very thirsty for the praise. But that sort of more subtle and beautiful thrill of, like, learning to see what I couldn't see is also something I have become addicted to. And when people are like, it's great, you did a good job, I'm kind of like, but then I don't get to have the moment where I'm like, oh my God, nice. Now I see the thing. Oh my God. And it's so, because also the way people read story, the fact that the words on the page is not what I thought, it's what they think when they read those words, is so endlessly fascinating to me.
You're very open to that, right? I think that you were, I'd put you at a somewhat of an extreme in how you react to that kind of thing, and you're not being shut down by the critique. And I think most people, I think I you know, don't get energized by that. You know, like I think the most people, especially if you come in thinking you've written something very good that you're excited about, when people come in with critique, people often shut down in response. And I feel like I've seen that Jed and I have been in workshops together. Like, I'm thinking of the RPG game that we played that you were turning into a novel. And I feel like every round of critique hit you very hard, and you would eventually come back and revise and give us something, a different version to look at. But I don't know, it was almost painful to watch. Like, it seemed like it was not a productive critique process for you. Like, we weren't giving you what you needed for that book. And I never quite figured out what we were doing wrong there. I don't know. But
I think you may be conflating a couple of different things, but that was certainly true of stories that I tried revising. And I think that what I'm hearing from Ben, or a version of what I'm hearing from Ben that I could use to adapt myself, is to frame it differently, rather than I'm making this the best that I can, meaning, like, I want this to be in publishable form before I hand it at the workshop. It's more like, I'm making this the best that I can in phase 1 of this project, where the next phase is to make it even better by incorporating what I hear from other people.
Yeah, and when I say make it the best I can, I'm partly saying, like, make it the best I can in terms of a comprehensible product that I can then usefully get feedback on. You know what I mean? It's sort of like that this is good enough so that the beta testers can understand what they're testing.
Yeah. It's very iterative, right? It's very much like, like I'm thinking like when you were doing game design, right? Like that like first version of the game was like little pieces of paper with scribbling on them, right? You didn't, like that you were testing it. You weren't going to go and produce beautiful pieces for us to use when it might change dramatically before it got to that.
Yeah,
right?
and that's, and that is something that's very much true in game design, that it's like most of game design is playing it. Like playing it again and again and again and again, because it's different. I mean, the experience of playing it is like, unlike, you're not going to read it 100 times. You're not asking your critiquer to read it 100 times, but if you're going to playtester to play a game 100 times, that's great, because it actually is meant to be played 100 times. It's actually meant to be replayable. So there is this sort of like, you're keeping learning, and you expect in the beginning not to know very much. Like just because you've written the first draft of it, you don't know very much what it is yet until you see how it plays. And that's, fiction isn't that dramatic because you're not expecting to play it 100 times, but it still is the case, I feel like, that until someone else who isn't you reads it, it kind of hasn't happened yet. Like the story is not the words on the page. The story is a reader finding those words and inventing new worlds of imagination with those words. And so if just you put the words on the page, there isn't a story yet. Like it only happens when somebody reads it, that the transmission only arrives. Of course, you are also a reader. So on some level, of course, you read your story, and that is a kind of transmission. But there are lots of things you can't see because you're you,
I mean, I do think there's different experiences of writing the story, and like I'm just thinking, like there are some pieces I've written that, especially some of those early short stories, where I didn't need critiquers, I didn't need workshoppers. Like I had an idea and I drafted it, and it came out pretty much fully formed as it was, and I put it out into the world, and it was good, right? And then other projects, I got it to a certain point, and then showing it to other people could do two things. Like on one level, it could just sort of help me cut away Nicola Griffith, I remember in Clarion, she talked about editing being like taking a rough gemstone and faceting, cutting away to let it shine, right? So there's a way in which your critiquers are maybe all they're doing is helping you reveal what you were trying to do all along, and that's very valuable. I do also think there is a kind of like what Megan McCarran was doing for you with the unraveling. There is the collaborative aspect of someone looking at your work and saying, well, but what about this? And you've completely like misread this, or you know what I mean? Like there's a bringing in the community perspectives that are going to push you harder, like deepen your thinking to make a better version. It's not that you couldn't, like there's executing your original thing to the best of who you are at that moment, and there's actually becoming a better version of you. I don't know.
But on the other hand, those are also connected, because it's like every time you have a plan, there are like two things in it. There's like, and they're mixed together, they're mashed together. When you have your original, there's like your grand commitment. I want to write a book that explores this. I want people to feel this kind of love or reconnection, or I want this redemption arc to inspire people, whatever. And then there's your like expectation of like how that's going to go down. You know what I mean? Like, and it'll be because blah, 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 blah. And like those get in a way, because I don't have the sense that when I took it to Megan McCarran, she was like, this isn't the right book for you to write. Write a different book. I don't have the sense that she was like, your idea is flawed. I have the sense that she was saying, you want to write a book that's critiquing gender in this way. Here's what you're completely missing about that. Like, it's still fascinating in a sense. You know what I mean? But it's like a grander version of that, because it's like, oh, here's what you thought you were intending, but here's what you were really intending beneath that. It's something that it's more true to your actual big intention, even if you have to give up the expectation tactically of how you thought it was going to work. It's more, because if it's not more in true with your deep fundamental intention, then you probably wouldn't. Because again, it comes back to like every critique. If it rings true for you, and you're like, when she said that, I was like, oh shit, you're right. Like that spoke to the so it was this intention that I already had. But it's like I didn't know it as well. I couldn't see what I had done the way she could see what I had done, and I was missing parts of the world that I didn't know about, that she knew about. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not really it. And I feel like you're right. Sometimes you just write a thing and you're like, that's cool, ship it. Like, I'm not saying never publish something without, I'm not saying everything doesn't have to be a laborious cycle of critique. And there's also crit burn, which we should also get to, which is you can over critique things. But I do feel when I write a thing and I'm trying to get it to like quote unquote as good as I can get it, that I'm like, but I know I can't, if it has any grandeur to its intention, if I'm trying at all to do anything that's hard, then I do know that I can't see yet what I did and that I'm waiting for that somebody to come and maybe they're going to just refine and I'm going to be, oh, that's good. I sort of thought of that. And maybe they're going to upset my entire set of expectations about how it's going to go. But ultimately, it's going to be in service of my true intention, you know?
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I agree.
The thing about crit burn, I mean, I think I've sort of been speaking like in praise of critique and how important it is and how important it is to see other people's. But just as you can also refine too long before showing it to everybody, that's another problem we didn't address when you just like fiddle and never ship it, like are never willing to. There's also such
I know
a thing
that
as,
one well.
Hey, right? Like that's another thing is you gotta, if that's your tendency, if your tendency is to fiddle with it forever, you really have to develop practices that force you to like kick it out.
Yeah.
And I do have a story about that too, but
crit burn.
I don't know if we have time. Back to crit burn. Maybe I'll tell that story too later. But also, I feel like I've definitely seen going through too many rounds of critique and sort of it blurring, like the original intention blurring, having too many perspectives, too much where you're trying to do everything at once, or I mean, it's probably what I was talking about that early, like it can happen that way that it did in when I was a Clarion and I heard 16 different things and tried to do them all at once. Like that's crit burn. But I also feel like it can just happen by successively, like the story going through a lot. And sometimes it's worth going through 3 cycles of critique. Sometimes I've done that. Sometimes it's totally worth it. The Unraveling definitely had at least 3 cycles of critique. And like we were talking about playtesting a game, that could be like 100, playthroughs or 200. But there is sometimes a point when you realize like I've either moved beyond what this work, like what I now want to do is different than what it originally did. Like it's just time to ship this. So yeah. That's a thing. And crit burn can sometimes have the effect that it's either a hodgepodge or that it's safe. That's the other thing. Sometimes rawness is good. And there's something where you can make everything more, you can fix all the problems, no more plot holes, no awkward bits, the pacing is right. And in the process, you've lost like the raw original energy of the thing. And that is actually, I'd rather be reading something that's flawed but had its original like passion and purpose than something that's been sort of subdued and toned and filed down to where it's perfectly, nothing about it is unacceptable.
Sort of one of the critiques of MFA programs is they produce MFA stories, right? And I think it is a problem with workshopping in general. It's something to watch out for, right? It's like it's when workshopping goes wrong.
Yeah.
I do think that it's interesting what you say about you and Jed saying that you hold on to things too long and you fiddle with it and so on, because I never do that, right? And I have the opposite
Why does that not surprise me?
Well, I have the opposite problem. I ship too soon, right? I get impatient. There's a concept in knitting about whether you're a process or a product knitter, right? And the people who are product knitters, like me, we love starting a project and then finishing the project.
Right.
Like we get a lot of satisfaction about like, here is the object, here is the thing I made, and I am now going to go on to the next product. And I think that's part of why I produce a lot. I produce a lot of stuff that gets finished. I'm very good at finishing things, but I rush them as a result, right? My knitting often has a couple errors in it. And my friend Rishani is much more painstaking than I am generally. She's a doctor. She's a pediatrician. She is who I would take my kids to because she will, if I ever had anything like seriously wrong with them, I take them to her because she's going to like go through every possibility and think it all through very carefully. She's like who you want for a doctor if there's anything really wrong, right? Whereas, but when she knits, if she makes an error 5 rows back, there's this tedious process called tinking, which is knit backwards, right? Where you unknit each of the stitches that you did wrong, and you work it back, fix the error, and then reknit the material. And it's I have a real psychological block to the labor of that, right? And so one thing I like about crochet is it's easier to hide the errors, just because of the sort of way crochet plays out. Knitting, they're very visible. And so, sorry, this is a long metaphor, but I think it's really relevant because it means that if you look at like all of the scarves I've knit, I think I knit one for Jed at some point, there's probably an error in there somewhere, maybe a couple, because I got too impatient to do it right. And that's so I'm speaking to all the writers out there who are not Jed and Ben, who are like me. And who rush things out the door before they're ready. Because I think in the same way you were talking earlier about that writer cheating himself by taking on somebody else's identity, I think I cheat myself. I think by not putting in the time and the work to do it right, maybe I put out something that gets published, but it's not as good as it could be. And like, I can see how you could turn into the kind of person who keeps things forever because it's never going to be as good as it could be. So there's maybe a happy medium here to be aiming towards, right?
This comes up at work a lot, where there are some people who want to get anything out the door as quickly as possible. And then there are people like me who, if left to our own devices, would never get anything out the door because, you have to get everything exactly perfect and spend a long time on it and think about things. And there has to be something in between. And I'm not sure what it is. But
yes. I have a suggestion, because then this is what I was going to say before about the thing that really, I started writing again in 27, and for the first 2 years I was only working on one very short story that I just kept tinkering with. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Ethan Ham, who I have later collaborated with on a bunch of things. In fact, Tumbarumba, which you got published in, Marianne. And he said he went to film school at UC Santa Cruz, and and while he was at film school, like every year they would make a film. Like every person would like every year make like the film for that year. It was like take them a whole year, and they would do all this thing. He also worked at my mom's summer camp that she ran, and it was a computer sports day camp in the beginning. And after working as a computer counselor the first year, he pitched her on making a video program. So he made a video program, and he had a bunch of kids, and there was like two groups of kids, the younger kids and the older kids, and every 2 weeks they'd make films. And the way that he did it was he taught them to do all the things, the shooting, they wrote their scripts, whatever, but then he'd make it good. You know what I mean? Like he'd sort of stay up all night the night before Parents' Day, like taking the mess that they'd made and like cutting it together and like making a film. And they were always really fun, great little films, and the parents were super happy and the kids were happy. And like there was always a debate at TSC, like would you force the kids to do all the work themselves, or do you like have them learn but then like package it to make it cool so they'll be excited? And he was definitely of the latter camp. So he basically was making every year a film, like with all the resources and seriousness of the UC Santa Cruz film department. And then over the summer, there were 4 sessions, 8 films. And he said, there were little goofy little films made by 7-year-olds or 14-year-olds, depending on which group it was. And but he's like, I learned more about filmmaking in the summer. Because I made 8 things, rather than one big thing. And he told me that because I was fussing on a thing forever, and like I should just send it out and start the virtuous cycle, which is what I did, of like sending things out. They were crap, they got rejected, and then I did a new one and I was learning. But I would suggest that in a way that does point toward a happy medium, because I think part of what I imagine, if you're impatient and you're at a certain level of skill and you can do a thing and maybe it's even publishable and you just do it and you're too impatient to go deeper and you send it out, is it's also not like, maybe the answer to both those things, or where's the line, is like the optimize for learning, right? Is like if you are either of these things could lead to you just being stuck in, or you could chew on one thing forever and never get all the learning that comes from the cycle of doing a lot of things, or you could be not being patient enough to wait for the point where you could encounter problems and resolve them, and you just solve the same way you've always solved them or whatever. Like, I don't know. That's my suggestion for how you.
I guess I want to highlight also one thing. I tend to beat myself up a lot about this particular thing and blame myself for being impatient and so on. And I guess I want to acknowledge that there are externalities here, right?
Yeah.
And
sure.
So when you think about, Jed, earlier when you mentioned the going off into the woods in Walden, like, Rose mom did his laundry, right?
Yep.
Like there's a I get frustrated because I look at my work and I'm like, I've been a finalist for many things. I was a finalist for the Lambda Awards, a finalist for the Asian American Book Awards. And there's a way in which I want to beat myself up and be like, oh, I should have worked harder on that thing and maybe I would have actually won the award. But then I think,
at what cost?
Well, more like, how was I supported or not supported in the course of writing that thing?
Yeah.
What were the external pressures that were leading to my rushing this out the door, perhaps, right? What would have happened if, I had gotten this big grant that would have meant that, even when I was, started my PhD program, there were some fellowships available that would have released me from teaching. And if I had gotten one of those, I would have had a lot more time, right? These are concrete factors that go into the writing of these books. And so I guess if you're listening to this podcast, I kind of want to say, be aware that historically men have had a lot more time than women. White men have had a lot more time than everybody, and don't necessarily put it all on yourself. And I'm in these days I'm in a much more privileged position than I used to be. But I remember when I was in grad school, I had a fellowship for my third year that let me off teaching, and I was reading for my exams for my PhD. And then the fourth year I was supposed to have a fellowship, and the grant had done badly on the stock market, the funds, and so they canceled my fourth year. So I was supposed to get $12,000, and I didn't, and they apologized, but I didn't get it. And I would have had to teach, but by that point I had moved to Chicago and I was living with Kevin, and he said, just write your book and I'll support you. Don't worry about bringing in any money this year, right? And that was transformative, right? So being able to work on Bodies in Motion for a year without having to think about teaching. I did nothing but write that year, right? Because I had a patron, essentially. So I think thinking about what are the pressures that are getting in the way of you doing your writing the way you want to do it, and addressing those is, thinking about, are there ways you can address those? Maybe setting up a Patreon, like Nora Jemison, who said to her readers, look guys, I would love to write full time and write more books. I think she said $5,000 a month to live in New York and do this. And they were like, we will all give you $10 a month each or $1 a month each. Enough people were willing to do that.
That's
she
easier
could
when you're already.
right. But, so
that's
this
at the
is,
Nora
Jemison
scale.
In the first trilogy, she had some fans and she was able to make that move. But so maybe you can't, I can't make that move yet. I can't say give me $5,000 a month and I'll quit my job, which I would really kind of be tempted to do so I could write more. But but maybe there are smaller things, right? Maybe there are, what is if there was one thing you could do to relieve the pressures on you, to make a little more space for you to go into the work, maybe that's the most useful thing.
And that goes back. Just that goes back to what you were saying earlier about making space to invite the muse in. Go ahead, Ben.
And I think the other useful thing out of what you said, because you sort of went towards it, gestured toward it, and then ended up somewhere different, is, yes, certainly think of the most useful thing, and also the attitude toward yourself, because I think part of the way that, for instance, part of the way that we are educated in oppressive societies to operate is to personalize, as our personal failings, what are actually structural situations, and which is not to say, and we're always in a position where we have partial agency. So both are important. Not that you should despair and be I am at the mercy of structural forces. Strategize, think, do, but also it is a way that you get suckered to treat everything as your personal foibles and failings when you want to dispassionately view where you are constrained and what those constraints mean, and to some extent it's partly we put pressure on ourselves. This is sort of what I was saying about how it was really toxic for me, this great man in a garret vision of writing, and there's other versions of that where it's we expect ourselves to live up to some expectation, and that can be counterproductive because, I mean, it's great to be motivated by a call to greatness or whatever, but there's also like the art of forgiving yourself, or the art of like being, given that I am subject to these structural constraints, you know what I mean? The thing that I'm going to do is take the next step. It's a little like process and product. Like I find that my tendency is to want to judge myself by product, and that it's far more productive for me to think not like, how soon will I get this done and is it great, but more like, have I made space for myself to be engaged with it, and like, did I manage, did it work to do it today, and if not, what's in the way? You know what I mean? Like, and especially novel, like every day is like a marathon, where it's just like, it's much more useful to be like, oh, I wrote this many words today, than to be like, can I get it done by April? You know what I mean? Like for me, it was. Anyway.
That actually, I mean, that leads in really well to that. Ben had suggested that we should add a segment to this podcast about, end with what we're working on now. And when we have guests on, we can ask them what they're working on now. And so I think that feeds in really well on a process. Yeah. Sort of process or product, however you want to address it, right? Like, so Jed, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but, what, as we're signing off, like, what are you working on at the moment?
What I am working on is a web presentation system that will present time travel stories of a particular sort in an interesting way.
Wow!
And
cool.
I have written the code to do this now, and I have written a demo story to show how it works, which is a Doctor Who parody. And I am working on a more serious story that will fit in this.
Wow. What a cool project.
That sounds super fun. It reminds me of like the kinds of things Yudhinjaya Vijayaratne is doing, where he's got his new novel, I think, has AI generated stuff that like he, like it's about that. And he also included that, like it's part of the book. So
that's great.
Anyway, Ben?
Well, I am still working, I'm actually working mostly on two different, there's some short stories in the back burner, but I'm working on two games. Like I'm working on the Spring on the Shtetl, which is the choice of games story. That's the writing that I'm doing, which is fun. But the thing that I'm actually been spending the most time on lately, which was just a vacation product with my son that we like collaborated on this thing, it was actually started out mostly his project, and I kind of gradually took it over. Although he got busy with school, so he doesn't mind. He's pretty excited. But is this Shira game, like this game based on Shira and the Princess of Power, which now at this point we've spent a lot of time playtesting and are really into. And I warned him at the beginning, like, there's no way we could get the Shira IP. This is just a fun thing. We're just maybe going to do this as a fan project. Now that we're so into it, I'm like, maybe we can get the Shira IP. So I actually sent some letters. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's actually worth asking to like Mattel, Netflix, DreamWorks, unless we have an in, because those are giant corporations. But what occurred to me is that if like I approach intermediate-sized game companies that have experience getting IP, that like that, you know what I mean, that's a size where maybe they'll talk to me. I was nominated for an Emmy, and
you could also talk to Noelle Stevenson.
Well, I don't know how to get to Noelle Stevenson. If anybody knows how to get to Noelle Stevenson, please, I would love to talk to her. I tweeted at her. Sure. Like, yes, I think she's slightly too big now for me to just call her up. But
you should invite her to be on the podcast.
Yes, let's invite Noelle Stevenson to be on the podcast, because I would love to talk to Noelle Stevenson. I'm a huge Noelle Stevenson fan. But
she's awesome.
Yes, totally. So maybe we can actually get the rights. And I also, like, for a while, I was like, well, and if we don't, I guess we could file the serial numbers off and have like a Kickstarter or whatever, that level of production where it's sort of like, it's the Ice Princess and the Wave Princess. Like, it's obviously Shira, but not really. But I was like, I'm never really excited about that, because I was like, that's kind of half-assed. Like, it's really cool that the game is Shira, and like when you look at the cards and they've got pictures from the show, it's like evokes. It's like Star Wars Rebellion is our biggest influence for this game, and it. Even more than that, honestly, I feel like it feels like you're playing episodes of the show that never happened. Like the things that the game generates are like narrative where you're like, oh my God, they would totally do that. Like, I don't know, like the entire rebellion collapses except for Spinnerella and Natasa, and they spend the season like recruiting everybody back, like coaxing Adora out of the Whispering Woods. Anyway, so So I was like, I don't really want to do it in a half-assed way. But then I realized, like recently I came to terms with, I was like, and I have a friend here who I discussed, an artist who I just talked about doing this with. But I was like, well, if I'm gonna file the serial numbers, like the game is really good at this point. And I was like, it doesn't actually have to be Shira at all. Like I could come up with some totally other, like, and then I got kind of interesting because like, what completely different like IP, like I don't know, like I was talking to this artist friend who's very into sort of more Cockian, I don't know, like it could be weirder and darker and very sort of 70, I don't know, like I was like, maybe there's a whole other story here to tell. Anyway, so that's so now I'm working on this game.
Cool.
Marianne, what are you working on?
So 2 things, I think, primarily. One is that my cookbook, I wanted to do a vegan version of it because my ex-girlfriend is vegetarian towards vegan, and I don't know, it's sort of for her. Like she made me aware of how frustrating it is to go to places and have like one thing on the menu that you can eat, right? And so I have this cookbook, and she's also Karina was distressed by people eating meat, and so she's Australian and she came for American Thanksgiving, and she knew that there'd be turkey, but she didn't know about the presentation bird aspect. And
a heavy custom.
So when that happened, we were doing a Friendsgiving thing. She actually burst into tears and had to run out of the room. So it was very tough for her. And so when we did Feast of Serendib, I always wanted to do a vegan edition where I would I would just take out all of the meat and chicken stuff so that people didn't have to deal with it. They didn't have to, turn the page and see the photos and whatever. And then, so that would have been the simple version. And I thought about doing that. Most of, like at least half the book is vegan already because Sri Lankan food is not dairy based and so on. So like I could have just put out a thin, medium sized book, but of course that was too easy. And so I'm like, no, if I'm going to do a vegan edition, I want it to be as substantial as the original. So I'm developing 40 new recipes to add in for all the meat things I'm taking out. So and there was a moment where I was trying to like get that done in time for Christmas sales, but I thankfully came to my senses. So that is now scheduled for, I think it's a May 1st launch. So I'm working on that, and that's pretty time consuming because I have to cook things. Sometimes I have to cook things over and over again to get it right. And I'm also trying to source and explain ingredients that are not commonly available here. So there's a sort of like interesting intellectual problems and researching online. There's a lot of research that goes into this. So that's a good chunk of my brain at the moment. And then the other thing I went to a lot of sci-fi conventions online this summer and ended up having conversations with people who I might not normally have access to. Like the whole virtual convention space has been great. And a couple of the pros that I talked to were very into spending time getting their backlist up on Amazon to sell directly to people. And at least one of them said, like, this is her retirement money. Like, she has a reliable income stream now from that she doesn't have from the dozen books, some of them award-winning, that she had before, right? Which I think is fascinating, right? That she traditionally published. So I've written and published several stories in my Jump Space universe. So one project right now has been kind of thinking through how to release them as ebooks. Like, what is the right approach to putting together, do I write half a dozen more and put them out as a book length collection? Do I do like one story for 99 cents or free and as a teaser, and then if people like it, have a set for $4.99 of 6 stories, which I think is probably what we're going to try. But it's involved like going back and looking at these stories again and thinking about them the way an anthologist would think about them. Like, oh, these are all kind of war stories and they're pretty depressing. Are people going to want to read one after another? Do I want to try and write something funny to break it up, or heartwarming, or that doesn't involve children dying. Because like 5 of the 6 stories involve children dying or being in danger. Like they're war stories, right? So space opera war stories. So that's, I don't know, like, and it's a little stressful, like trying to go back in and think about things in this. I really just want an editor to hand it off to. Like,
let's talk.
This is back to editing. Yeah. So, because it's making decisions yourself is tough. I think there are a lot of advantages to indie publishing, but there are also a lot of depressing aspects to it, or stressful aspects.
Yeah. Speaking of which, before you make pricing decisions about Amazon, talk to me, because there's some stuff I want to make sure you know about the royalty structure. You may already know it. But...
We will have a conversation. No, I don't know. Okay. So we should have a conversation. Yeah. So there's all kinds of technical things that we should talk about. So yeah, that's I don't know. Like you say, like, what am I working on? Like I pulled out here's my to-do list, and like this is the SLF to-do list, and then this is teaching. Teaching's pretty good. This is the writing one, but there's like, I should add like 3 or 4 other things.
You didn't mention wildcards.
This is I've got, I'm not working on that till Monday. So that's tomorrow. On the calendar for tomorrow to start writing my next
book. This is the to-do list until tomorrow.
That is really like today. This is what I'm working on right now. Wow. So there's the garden, etc., so on. So like there's many pages of subject-oriented to-do list. I'm sorry, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, I was flipping pages on my notepad, showing them on the video. So, yeah. Yep. Anyway, and I've got like, I don't know, I might try and revise a story or 2. There's 2 of them, 2 original stories for the collection that I've sent out. I've gotten feedback on. One of them's very close to done and just needs cleanup edits, so I might try and get that one finished today. So, we'll see.
Nice.
I don't know. Okay. That was long. In the future, I will keep what am I working on shorter.
It's amusingly impressive, the length of your to-do list, for those not able to see it at home. There's a brick thick to-do list that's pretty much Marianne's vibe. That's whoosh.
Well, and in fact, the problem, right, is that as we do things, new things get generated. So like as we were recording this podcast, at some point I was thinking, I have to remember to talk to Ben, because I'd really like to teach with him. And we've talked about the SLF doing Clarion-style workshops over the summer, and I should find out from him, like, what would it take for me to get him to fly out to Chicago and teach a 10-day workshop with me. So that is now a new thing that I have to jot onto the to-do list, to have a conversation with you about that.
Sounds amazing. Do you have any pull with the coronavirus?
Well, it would take some planning, and it probably would not happen until summer of 2022 at the earliest.
Hopefully. It'll be.
Yeah. So
by then it'll be an epidemic and not a pandemic. So.
Yeah, I expect that. I mean, I could be wrong, but I expect that by 2022 we will have a combination of vaccine and treatment that will
make it
will let us be in person again.
Yeah.
So we may be masked. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Or outdoors. Chicago outdoors is not so bad in the summer. So yeah.
Well, let's talk.
All right. Well, thank you to our guest, Jed Hartman.
This is our guest, we are still insisting as a guest.
Yes, thank you to Darius Finisar, our video editor. We really need a sign-off. We're going to work on that. This is Benjamin Rosenbaum and Marianne Monroch advising you to, I don't know, decide whether consider all of the critique and all the feedback you've gotten on how you've been humaning, and think about, is this really the human project that you want to be engaging at this time?
Take the person who's most excited about your being human and the person who's worst excited about being human, and see how you could get the worst person to have the experience the best person is having of your being human.
That's probably reasonably good advice.
That's actually pretty good advice.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Hello again, humans. If you have any thoughts about this episode or anything else about the show, please email us at mrahpodcast@speculativelyterature.org, or you could tweet with us at mrahpodcast. This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohanraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Darius Vinisar. Music composed by Thor Bremer, and cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.